about 7 lines from the bottom. Eshkichan tuma, no sar minala. So we are talking about things that a person is liable for, meaning even though we're not liable for pigul, such as the flower offering, but a person is still liable for consuming it in a state of impurity. So we found a source for tumah. What about consuming these things after they've, what about leaving them over past their prescribed time? If you leave it over for too long, it's called nosar. So minalan, what's the source of that? Asi chil chil mitumah. Agzer Shava learned out of tumah. Fine. Says the Gemara, why are you learning the prohibition of nosar? From tumah, you can learn it from pigul. The leilef, avon mi pigul. Meaning, why are you learning to obligate oneself and your source is from tumah? You can learn it from pigul, and by pigul, you're not going to be obligated. So, one of these, what's it more comparable to? Situations. So, first, the Gemara thinks, mistabra mituma, habelela melach. It's more logical to learn that from tumah. Why? Shekain gezel siman. Tumah and nosar have in common gezel. Literally, gezel means stealing. That's not what it means here. It's an acronym for guf, meaning nosar and tumah are both invalidations in the thing itself, as opposed to pigul, which is an invalidation with one's thoughts. That's the gimel. Both nosar and tumah do not rely on the throwing, the zrika. The zayin is the zrika of the blood to get to their invalidation. But by pigul, you have to have you have to have the throwing of the blood to get to the invalidation. And then the lamed is, they both say chilul, the word chilul. The lamed's in the word chilul. They both have the word chilul in them. So therefore, tumah is more, nosar is more similar to tumah and not more similar to pigul. Says the Gemara, adarabba, say the exact opposite. Me pigul le'lemela. Learn it out from pigul. Why? Shekain hutar tzitz tahor bizman kari. So what does that mean? So shekain hutar, that both nosar and pigul, we never permit them. As opposed to tumah, you can permit it by the korban pesach if most people are in a state of impurity. Also, the tzitz is what the Kohen Gadol wears. That doesn't help you for a nosar and pigul. It only helps you for tumah. Tahor. So tahor, they're both tahor. They're both pure. Tumah is impure. Okay. The zman, they both get impure. They both get invalid. Sorry, through the zman, through time. Both nosar, something you leave over, and pigul you have in mind. About 3 lines from the bottom of 45 books. Both those you have to do with invalidation of time. Either you leave it over, or you have in mind to consume it past its right time, and both of them are psulin be'karev. The thing itself is invalid, not the person. As opposed to tumah, the tumah is on the person's body. On the person's body, that's the invalidation. So we see that nosar is actually much more similar, has more similarities to pigul than it does to tumah. So usually the one that has more similarity wins. So v'hani nefishin, there's much more similarity between pigul and nosar than nosar and tumah. Says the Gemara, you're right. I'm gonna find a new source. Elamidetani Levi, like Levi taught. The Tani Levi nine shav b'psul zman hakasav medaber. Talmud lomar v'lo yechalalu. Next page. B'shnei chilul and hakasav medaber. Echad pasal nosar, v'echad pasal tumah. When the verse states about consuming the meat when you're in a state of impurity, it says v'lo yechalalu. You should not profane my holy offerings. Now, the word yichalalu could have been spelled differently, didn't it? So below yichalalu, sounds like it's including multiple things that are going to profane my holy offerings. So what is it referring to? What are the multiple ones? One is nosar, and one is tumah. Both of those are included, and therefore that's the source that nosar is going to be invalid, even though our Mishnah says that it won't invalidate, but by the things that pigel is not going to invalidate, no sar will invalidate. How do we know from here? The fact that it says v'lo yichalalu, it sounds like it's talking about two chilulin and not one, two profanities and not one. What are the two? Tuma and no sar. Okay, now, yeah, the Mishnah stated. Yeah, the Mishnah stated that consuming the blood in a state of impurity is not going to be a violation like it is by the other sacrifices. We pointed out there is a violation to consume blood in general, but specifically the blood of a holy offering, the blood by holy offering. If you're in a state of impurity, then there is no prohibition. That violation of consuming things in a state of impurity does not apply to blood. How do we know that? The pasuk says, "V'ani nasati lachem shelachem yehei." So, or also the blood, there's no violation of no sar, leave it over. So, what's the source? Yeah. So it says, I gave it to you, lachem shelachem yehei. It should be yours for you, meaning has a certain level of mundaneness. It does not have the same level of sanctity, because the verse says it should be for you. For you means for you and not for me, Hashem, which means that if you leave it over, or if you consume it in a state of impurity, it's going to be less stringent because it's for you and not for me. Now, really, this is talking about by me'ilah, getting benefit from things that are holy. So it's really stated over there that it says lachem, it should be for you, and therefore there's no me'ilah by the blood. We're using it over here to show you that it's it's one level down, and therefore it's not going to have the same restrictions as the other sacrificial parts are going to have. Oh, look good. How are the Bahamas? Warm. That is the opinion of Ula. We're going to bring three sources. We're going to ask later on why we have to have three sources. So Jules will say, just to confuse us, but the Gemara will say a different answer. So the Rabbi Shmuel, says, Amar Kra lechaper. Specifically, the blood is given to atone. Lechapar nasativ v'lo leme'ilah. Specifically to atone, but not to be subject to me'ilah, to misuse. Once again, the verse states that it's going to be on a lower level. Everything else is subject to it belongs to the base of Mikdash, and if you misuse it, then you violated the violation called me'ilah, not the blood that's sanctified. That's going to be thrown onto the altar. Third source, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kra, the pasuk says, who? It, meaning the blood will be the same before and after it was thrown. Hu lifnei kapara ki la'achar kapara. It's going to be the same throughout. What does that mean? Ma achar kapara ein ba me'ilah. Once you got atoned for it, so now the blood is for sure no me'ilah. Af lifnei kapara ein ba me'ilah. Even before there's atonement, I mean before the blood is thrown, there's also not going to be me'ilah. Even when it's the full state of sanctity, there's still not going to be a me'ilah. Says the Gemara, maybe go the other way. We finish the track, the Raman Knuckles. So we kind of way more than we expected. So Ema La'achar Kapara. There's a short daf coming on Shabbos. Don't worry, it's like 10 lines. And there's another short daf coming on Daf Aleph. So we have two short dafim. Don't worry. Where are we? Right now? Yeah, right. We are 8 lines down. 46A. 46A. Oh. You're getting very excited. Your excitement's overtaking you. No, not yet. So, I think you dreamt it. It's possible. So, Ava, or a dream come true. Maybe say the opposite. Maybe the blood has the same status of after atonement. I know which way to go. Maybe the blood should have me'ilah beforehand and after it atones for it, and not the other way around, and not that it should not have me'ilah. So this third source of how do you know that the blood is on a lower level, we're now saying maybe go the other way, compare it to make it more stringent, not to make it more lenient. Says where that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that after it was atoned for you, it's still going to have that high level of sanctity and therefore be subject to me'ilah, to misuse. Why? There's nothing that you did the mitzvah with it already, and now there's me'ilah. It doesn't exist. Once you did the mitzvah with it already, now it's yours. So that's right. Make a big l'chaim. So it says, really? We know that every morning they would take the trumas hadesha. They would take the ashes every morning from the previous day, and they would put it there on the side of the altar, and it would get swallowed up. So, how about trumas hadesha? Trumas hadesha is something which, even though the avoda was done with it, you have to leave it where it is. Every morning you would come with the shovel, you would come with a little thing, and you would pick up the ashes, and you had to put it on the east side of the ramp. And you had to place it there, and you could not get any benefit from it. Meaning, once you took it and you put it there, it had to remain there, and it was going to be swallowed up in its place. So you do find after you finished moving the ashes, it has restrictions now. You can't do whatever you want with it; it has to stay there. Says the Gemara, well, yeah, but that's not the rule. That's the exception, because that and the Kohen Gadol's clothing are both things that once they've been used, you cannot use it anymore. However, because those are two places that the Torah emphasizes that, it's bound by the following rule. Anytime you have two parts of the Torah teaching the same thing, so the reason why it stated it twice is to teach you that only applies in those two places. Because if it wanted to teach you that it applies everywhere, it could have just taught it once. The fact that it taught it twice shows you that it's only in those two places. So here, Trumas Hadeshin and the Big Day Kahuna, the clothing the Kohen Gadol wears, even after they've been used, you cannot benefit from it. But it's two examples, and therefore that's the exception and not the rule. So it says the more Hanich Rabbanan Darmi Hanich Misham Malamet Shtunin Ganiza. Elo Rabbi Dovid Gleizer Mutar and Hein LeKohen Hedyot Ubulvat Shalishtamesh Ben Yom Kippurim Acher Ma'ikol Neimar. There's two opinions by the clothes of a Kohen Gadol. One opinion holds can't do anything with it, gotta bury it. But the other opinion says a regular Kohen can wear it. There's just one restriction: you can't wear it again on Yom Kippur. So, according to the opinion that says that the clothing of a Kohen Gadol can be worn by regular Kohen, that only leaves us with the Trumas Hadesha, with the picking up the ashes in the morning. That's the only example of something which you did the avoda, so to speak. You picked it up and put it on the side, and now there's a restriction; it has to remain there. You can't use it for anything else. So, once it's only one example of such a situation, maybe that's the rule and not the exception. Says the Gemara. Okay, there's another one. Mishum Dahavi Trumas Hadesha, the Egla Arufa. When the corpse is found and no one knows who the owner is outside the city, and you take the cap and you break its neck, that also has to remain there. Special restriction, and even after it says the arfu sham, you have to leave it there. Even after you finish the service of the egla rufa, you cannot do anything else with it. It has to remain there. Says they are shneiksun b'ayim gachad because shneiksun b'ayim gachad ein melamdin. Says they are so here's two examples of things that are you finished its service and you can't get any benefit from it. Since we found two places that this applies, so that becomes the exception and not the rule. Says the Gemara, this is a classic. Every time this comes up, this happens. This idea that when you have something mentioned in two places in the Torah, obviously, is itself a dispute. There's a dispute. There's this idea that when you have two things in the Torah that are teaching the same thing, those are the exception. Is that only true when it's two things taught or when it's three things taught? Meaning when there's three of the same idea taught, then I understand it was taught in three places because only in those three places it's going to apply. But if it's only taught in one or two places, it could still apply across the board. Or no, once it's mentioned in two places, so that teaches you that that's the exception and not the rule. So if you hold that it's Shnei Ksum Kechad Ein Melamdin, two psukim teach you the same thing, and therefore Ein Melamdin, they cannot teach you anywhere else in the Torah because it's just for those two cases. So then I understand. Trumas Hadeshin and Egla Rufa are teaching you that after the service is done, you cannot use them anymore. But Hanich Lamanda Amar Ein Melamdin, El Lamanda Mer Melamdin, Mike Lameimar. But what about the other opinion? I think that's Rabbi Yehuda holds this way. The other opinion that holds that really, even if you have two psukim, you can still learn out that that's the rule across the board. Once it's three psukim, then you can't. According to that, you only have two verses. You have the Trumas Adeshin, lifting up of the ashes in the mornings, and you have the Egla Rufa. Those are only two cases where once you finish the service, you cannot benefit from it anymore. Well, it's only two psukim, so therefore that can be the rule across the board. And if that's true, so then why did our Gemara say that? It doesn't make sense to teach you that the blood after it was sprinkled on the altar can't be used for anything, because we never find that once the service is done, it has restrictions. What do you mean? We have two cases here and not three where it's been done, and there are restrictions. So for the blood, you should have the same restriction. So says the Gemara, no. Trey miyute slivi. Those two cases have a special verses that limit your ability to use it afterward. A special verse that teaches it, meaning it's not two things teaching the same rule. It happens to be each one has a special verse in their own section, which eliminates the possibility of using it for your own benefit. So what are those verses? Hachaksiv ha'arufa. It says that the egla ha'arufa, the hay teaches you that calf, meaning, yeah, egla ha'arufa teaches you that that calf. And what about that calf? Yeah, that's the calf that has to that you break the neck, and it's left there. But it's only that calf, nothing else. The hay teaches you that that's unique by the calf, that you can't use it for anything. It has to be left there. And by the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, it says v'samo. It says you should place its clothing, not the sam, just to place it. V'samo, its clothing shall be placed next to the altar, and nothing else. Meaning, it could have said to place it regularly. It said v'samo should place it, and not the sam to place. It teaches you that it's unique. Also, it's very unique. It has its own limitation that it has to be placed next to the altar, but you can't apply that to anything else. Okay, so at the end of the day, what do we have? Three verses that teach you that the blood is not subject to me'ila, to misusage, and therefore we're understanding that it's not going to have the same restrictions as being left over, consuming it while you're impure. So you have three psukim. So we had Ula, Rabbi Shmuel, and Rabbi Yochanan. So it says the Gemara, what do you need three psukim for? So, yeah, v'tlata kroi b'dam lamal. What do you need three psukim by the blood? For what reason? Says the Gemara, to teach you to eliminate three restrictions. L'me'ute me'ila minosar u'metuma. To teach you that me'ila does not apply by the blood. Me'ila, usually anything that's holy you can't use for your own benefit, does not apply by the blood. Minosar, if it's left over, there's no violation for the blood. Umituma, if you consume it in a state of impurity, there's also no violation. Aval pigel lo tzarich kra. The fact that there no pigel by the blood does not need its own verse. Why? Because our Mishnah taught us Kol sheyesh l'matir bein olam mizbech hayav l'mishum pigel v'dam gufei matirhu. Pigel, the rule is, as we know, it's only something which has a permitter. Something else permits it for something. So classically, the blood permits it for consumption. Well, okay, their pigel will apply. But if you have the wrong intent while you're slaughtering it, that's not going to ruin the blood. It's not going to invalidate the blood. Why? Because the blood itself is the permitter. So it's not going to invalidate the blood. It'll only invalidate something else that has a different permitter. Just like the flour offering, the flour itself is put onto the altar. There's no permitter. So too, if you have the wrong intent at one point of the service, so then that is not going to invalidate the blood for usage. Now, I think something which is discussed, is glancing a little bit, is we know, very nice. You have the wrong intent during slaughtering to consume the offering after the right time. That blood is not going to be invalid. The problem is that the rule by Pigel is that nothing is invalid until you put the blood onto the altar. So, what is the Mishnah telling us? I think that Tosfos talks about it. What is the Mishnah teaching us? That when you slaughter the animal and you have the wrong intent, it does not invalidate the blood? Yeah, obviously, because Pigel only invalidates once you finish all four of the services. Now we have to see if there was an invalid thought, and if yeah, it's going to ruin the offering. But there's no invalidation that happens before the blood was sprinkled onto the altar. That's the question on this part of the Mishnah. What is it coming to teach me? That a wrong thought by slaughtering invalidates the blood? Nothing is actually invalid until after the blood is thrown onto the altar. So that's a food for thought. Yeah, maybe your next dream, Jules, will be about this. So yeah, okay, fine. So that concludes that. Next part, that we know that pigel is specifically mentioned by the korban shlomim, by the peace offering. So by the peace offering, it happens to say the word kares 3 times in regards to this. So yeah, b'nichras nefesh, and it says b'nichras nefesh. It says it 3 times. So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, shlosha krisos b'shlomim lama. Okay, the page. What do you need 3 krisos by shlomim for? To teach you what? So it says achas leklal, the achas leprat, the achas ledvarim she'ein nechal. So one teaches you, just tells you the general rule that by consuming things in a state of impurity, in a state of impurity, you get kares. Now that's the general rule. So you need one to do the general rule. But then the Torah specified specifically by the peace offering. So that's a klal uprat, a general rule with a specification that follows. Why? To teach you anything that's brought up on the altar that if you're in a state of impurity, so then you are going to get kares. So you have a klal, teach you for all sacrifices, but then it specifies specifically a shlamim to teach you the things that are similar to a shlamim. Will have this restriction. And the third kares comes to teach you, it comes to include even things that aren't fit for eating, like the wood or the frankincense that aren't fit for eating. If you eat that while you're in a state of impurity, you're chayav also, at least according to the Rabbanan. Now, just adding, you would need a special verse to teach you that, because in general, any violation of the Torah that has to do with eating, it has its own restriction, meaning you have to eat it in the normal way, you have to eat it within a certain time period, you have to eat things that are normally eaten. So if you don't normally eat a frankincense or wood, so you ate it and it's a violation. No, you have to have a special verse to teach you that you would violate that, because without the special verse, you would not have known that. It's not things that are normally eaten. Okay. Well, Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah said that only things that are generally eaten, that you're going to the violation only applies to things that are generally eaten. But the Mishnah excludes eitzim, wood, frankincense, and the ktoris, what you bring with all the different spices, the ktoris. So that he says you're not over the violation of consuming that in a state of impurity. So that is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. So according to him, so then so what's the third kares coming to teach me? It can't be teaching me things that are generally not eaten are going to be violated, because he learns in our Mishnah that things that are generally not eaten don't have a violation. So what does he use the third kares for? Lasuye chatos hapinimios comes to include the consuming the chatas offerings that are brought on the inner altar. Why would you have thought those should be excluded? To which you need another verse to include them. You would have thought mistakenly, but you would have thought. In that section of Shlomim, Rabbi Shimon himself limits the entire pigel violation to only a Shlomim. And he says only something which is brought on the outer altar is subject to the violation of pigel. So you would have thought that maybe Mishum Tuma Namilo, maybe only things that are like Shlomim that are brought on the outer altar are subject to the violation of being consumed while the person is in a state of impurity. Therefore, the verse teaches you that no, when it comes to the state of impurity, even things that are brought on the inner altar will be bound by this violation and therefore get kares. That no, even though pigel only applies to things on the outer altar, Tuma applies to things even in the inner altar. Speaking of Reb Shimon, okay, so we're gonna have basically now two. This is like if you like machlokas, this is perfect. So we're gonna have two versions of what the machlokas is. It's gonna come out really 4 opinions. two opinions according to one version and two opinions according to another version. So I think they give you a chart, but not so hard, really not so hard. All we have to know is this, that there's two kinds of tumah, right? There's the person being impure, which consumes something, and there's the object being impure. That's one thing we have to know. Second thing we have to know is the debate in our Mishnah revolves around things that are not generally eaten. The Tanna Kama says those things you are liable for in a state of impurity, and Rabbi Shimon says no, those things you're not liable for. So we need to figure out, is it talking about when you're in a state of impurity, or is it talking about where the object is impure, or is it talking about both? Where is their argument? Let's say wood. If you consume wood or frankincense, according to Rabbi Shimon, there's some case either you're in a state of impurity or it's in a state of impurity, and you don't get lashes. There's no violation. And according to the first opinion, there is a violation. We just have to plug in which state of impurity are we talking about, meat or the food, or the not not edible food. So Itmar, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lakish. So the first, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lakish, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanin. We have two pairs, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lakish, and we have Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yossi, like color war, yeah. So two of them on each side. Now, one of them, Chad Mahayizuga. One of them from that pair, the Chad Mahayizuga. So you have two pairs, one on this and one on that side. One from this side has an opinion about it, and one from this side has an opinion about it. So Chad Amar, one of them said Machlokas B'Tumas Basar. The whole debate between Rav Shimon and the other opinion of Tanna Kama is when the thing itself is impure, when the wood is impure and you eat it. There they have a debate. Tanna Kama says you're liable, Rabbi Shimon says you're not liable. Aval B'Tumas Aguf, when the person himself is impure, everyone agrees, even the Tanna Kama, Divrei Hakol Eino Loka. Right? A lenient view. We're limiting the restriction of the Tanna Kama. They only said you get lashes for the wood being impure, but not you being in a state of impurity. Okay. V'chad Amar, no. No. The same debate they have when the object is impure is going to be the same debate when the person's impure. The Tanna Kama says in both cases you're going to be liable, and Rabbi Shimon says in both cases you are not going to be liable. Okay, that's the first version. Now, my taima, Kavan de Karina Be the Habasar, the verse that is in the 7th chapter, 19th verse, says the Habasar and the meat, which comes to include even things that are not edible. The Habasar shayiga b'chol tamei, Karina Be v'tumaso alav. So, what's the reason that we're going to say that this machlokas applies to both cases where the meat is, where the wood is impure, and where the person's impure? Because we have two verses that are juxtaposed next to each other. Verse 19 is talking about the object itself being impure, and verse 20, the next verse, is talking about the person being impure. So the juxtaposition tells you that it should be the same, according to this opinion. Obviously, the other opinion holds that we don't learn from the juxtaposition that they should be the same. That's the first version of what the dispute is. Rav Yomi Masni Haki. That's how Rav Yomi taught this debate. However, Rav Kahana Masni Haki, Rav Kahana taught it differently. Chad Mahayizuka, Chad Mahayizuka, one from this pair, one from this pair. A seifa. They're going on the latter part, meaning Chad Amar Machlokas Betumas Aguf. The whole debate in our Mishnah is when the person is in a state of impurity and he goes and consumes the wood or the frankincense. Aval Betumas Basar, when the wood or the frankincense itself is impure, Divrei Hakol Loka. So this is much more stringent. They said everyone agrees you get malchus, even Reb Shimon. Right. So previously, the first opinion held the most lenient view. Even Tanna Kama holds you don't get malchus. Here we're saying the most strict view that even Rabbi Shimon says that you get malchus. The Chadamar and the other one says kimachlokas bazu, kakmachlokas bazu. No, the same machlokas by a person being impure is the same machlokas by the food being impure. Amar Rava says on this mistaber kimandamar machlokas bazu, kimachlokas bazu, kakmachlokas bazu. Says Rava, it's very understandable. This last opinion that it's the same machlokas by both. Whether the wood is impure or the person's impure, Tanna Kama will always hold you liable, and Rabbi Shimon will always hold that you are exempt. Why? Kaven the lo karina be v'tuma so alav v'nikrasa lo karina be v'abasar sheyiga b'chol tamei lo yochal. The two verses are different. They're juxtaposed, but we're not going to learn from the juxtaposition. The second verse that talks about the violation is talking about the person being impure. The first verse that talks about the meat is not going to be included in that restriction. So therefore, therefore, the Tanna Kama is going to hold in both cases. In both cases, you'll be liable, but Rabbi Shimon's going to hold that you're not going to be liable. You're not going to be liable in both of these cases. Yeah. Sorry, let's just do one more time. My timer. Sorry. They are juxtaposed to each other. And just like Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold there's a violation by consuming non-edible foods, in one case, meaning he doesn't learn the verse in verse 19, habasar, to include things that are not edible. Therefore, he's not going to apply it to the next verse, which talks about a person being impure. So you have two verses. Verse 19, and there the habasar comes to include not edible foods. Then you have the next verse talking about the person himself being impure. There's juxtaposition between two verses. So if you hold in the first verse the habasar includes that even if the not edible food is impure, and it's juxtaposed to the next verse, which talks about the person being impure, so then it'll apply to both cases. That's the Tanna Kama, that they apply it to the wood being impure. It's also applied to the person being in a state of impurity. Rabbi Shimon, who does not learn from the habasar that the unedible food is going to be subject to this violation, also is not going to apply it to a person being impure consuming the non-edible food. So whatever you hold by the food that's not edible, you're going to hold the same thing by the person. So if that's impure and you violate the prohibition, when the person's impure, you also violate the prohibition. If you hold that when you consume that food when it's in a state of impurity, the wood, you are not violating it, you do not violate the prohibition. And when you are in a state of impurity and you consume the wood or the frankincense, you've also not violated the prohibition. Yeah. Now, that's very good, but the problem is, what does Rabbi Shimon do with habasar? The ha'amar, v'habasar. The extra v'habasar and the meat is coming to include something. So Tanna Kama holds and includes that not edible foods are included in the violation of if they're impure and you consume them. But according to Rabbi Shimon, who holds that they're not included, what does he do with that verse? To teach you, l'rabos eitim ulevona l'psule be'alma. It's coming to teach you that if the wood or the frankincense is impure, so then it it invalidates the service. But not that if you consume it, you violate the prohibition. It's just the invalidation. One of the invalidations of a service. Make sure that your wood you put up on the altar is not impure. If it does, it's going to be a psul. It's going to be invalidation. After talking about everything which is invalid, now we're going to finish off talking about everything which is valid. What you should have in mind, right? End up on a positive note. So, l'shem shisha dvarim, you have to have 6 things in mind. So, let's see. Hazevach nizbach l'shem zevach. So when you sacrifice the sacrifice, you should have in mind the sacrifice. Yeah. L'shem zoveach, you should have in mind the owner. Have in mind that owner. L'shem Hashem, have in mind God. L'shem Ashim, have in mind it should be like Aish, fire. It should be fully consumed. We'll see what's coming to tell you. L'shem Reach, it should have, we'll see what that means, also have a good fragrance. L'shem Nichoach, it should be cause pleasantness to Hashem. Ve'hachatas, ve'ha'asham, l'shem chet. And when you're bringing the chatas and the asham, the sin or the guilt offering, you should have in mind that it is atoning. It's atoning for a sin. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yossi, af mi shlo haya belibo l'shem echad mikol elu kasher. If you didn't speak out any of these intents, that's going to be kasher. Shehu Tanai Bezdin, because we learned on the second page, Beis Amud Beis, that there was a enactment not to speak out what you're having in mind for, because you might mess up. right? So therefore, don't speak out. I'm going to have in mind for this offering, because if you slip up and have in mind a different offering, it can cause a violation. So therefore, even if you didn't utter any of these things, it's still kosher. At the end of the day, it's only the invalidation of the one who's servicing you, the Kohanim. It's their intent that's going to create a violation. Therefore, we say don't speak it out, because if he messes up, it's going to be an invalidation. Therefore, even if you don't speak any of this out, Rashi tells us that earlier we learned that having no intent is like having positive intent, not negative intent. Right? That was the whole Gemara. At the end, a stamon, having something stam in your mind, is considered like a positive intent, and therefore, even if you didn't speak it out, we still assume that you had this in mind. Okay. Let's see if we can do this. Yeah. So let's see. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'm Rabbi Yehuda Rav. So just speaking out the things in our Mishnah, and Ola l'shem Ola. When you're bringing an Ola offering, make sure you have in mind an Ola. Lafuke l'shem shlamim, as opposed to having in mind the peace offering. Dilo. Isha l'shem isha. When you want to have in mind that it gets fully consumed, any offering that gets consumed, make sure it gets fully consumed, as opposed to what? Lafuke kivava, roasting it. It should get a little burn, maybe a little nice, medium rare. No. And make sure it gets fully, have in mind it should get fully consumed. At least the offerings that get fully consumed. Don't have in mind, it should just be like a little roasted. No. Reyach, make sure has a nice fragrance. L'shem reyach, have that in mind. La'afuke evarim shetzalan behalan delo. As opposed to the limbs, when you bring up the limbs that get roasted, so those are not meant to have a nice fragrance. But the incense, different, those offerings are supposed to have a nice fragrance to them, as opposed to the limbs that don't have a nice fragrance to them. Why? Because Rashi explains, because the limbs themselves, first they get roasted beforehand, and therefore they don't produce a good smell. But other things, right when you put it on, that produces a good smell. L'shem hanachas ruach. So you should have in mind giving pleasantness to Hashem. This is very important and even maybe partially related. What is the pleasantness? The Torah tells us by the sacrifices you have to have a reach nichoach LaHashem. You bring the sacrifice as a pleasantness to God. What is the pleasantness? I think Rashi and Chumash, but Rashi here also says, because Hashem said to do, and you did His will. That's the pleasantness. He said, you bring the sacrifice, and you listen to what He said. Doing His will in itself, that's the pleasantness. When Avraham Avinu said to do, He did. Didn't ask questions, then He did. That itself is the beauty of it. To do the will when He says to do. So yeah. There's a Gemara about that. Comparing Moshe to the Avos. Yeah. So okay. So fine. That's that. Now, LaHashem, L'Shem Misha Amar V'Haya Ha'olam. Interesting. LaHashem means you should have in mind for the one who created the world, the one who said, "And the world will be." Ha'ya Olam. Have that in mind. Okay. Amar. Okay, we'll see. So, Amar Rabbi Dovid Chatos sheshakta l'shem ola psula l'shem kulin kshera. A chatos, this we know already. A chatos that was shechted with the wrong intent as an ola offering, it's invalid. But if you shechta l'shem kulin kshera, right? Only if you have the wrong intent of another sacrifice is it going to invalidate. But if you have in mind just to eat for your barbecue, that's not going to invalidate. That's kshera. Amar Blazer my taima derab. What's the reason? Well, yichalu as kacha b'nei Yisrael. So it says that you should not profane my holy sacrifices. Only sacrifices can mechala, profane sacrifices, but mundane thoughts cannot profane sacrifices. Having in mind for a barbecue is not going to cause invalidation. Having in mind for an ola will. Masiv Rabba Amar Rabbi Yossi Af Mishalo Haya Balibo L'Shem Echad Mikolelu Kasha. Even if you didn't have in mind even if you didn't speak out any of these intentions, it's still kosher. Shehu Tanai Bezdin, because that's the court established that you don't have to speak it out because we're worried that you're going to mess up. Sounds like if you don't have anything in mind, it's okay. But hahaya libo b'shem l'shem kulin pasol. The implication is if you had nothing in mind, and don't worry about it, it's fine. If you have in mind something that's mundane, that's going to be invalidation. No. Dilma lohaya klal kasher umaratza hahaya b'libo l'shem kulin kasher v'eina maratza. The implication is true, just the application is a little different. The implication is if you have nothing in mind, it's good and it appeases. It'll cause favor, it'll appease, it'll fulfill your obligation. If you have in mind something wrong, let's say for your barbecue, so the offering itself is still going to be fine, but it's not going to cause appeasement, atonement for you. Therefore, you'll have to bring another offering. So it's not going to fully invalidate it, that you can't stop fit upon the altar anymore, but it will necessitate that you have to bring another offering to atone for your 55. We'll finish the parak tomorrow.